challenge and, if necessary, destroy media narratives. I'm George Samueli, and it is now 9:11 p.m. in a very, very grim, dark, sunless, lightless, lifeless, dreary city of Budapest. I mean, it's like it's evening before it even started morning. So it's a very um, depressing time to be a depressing time to be alive, a depressing time to be here. Um, and and so, but on that uplifting note, welcome everybody who has joined me for the Thursday night live stream. So thank you, everybody. And so a few things I want to talk about. The I think the theme of today's live stream is the complete media bullshit that we're being served up on a number of different issues. I mean, the first issue, obviously, is this never ending saga of Jeffrey Epstein. So we keep, month after month after month, we can go on and on now about Jeffrey Epstein. Now, it's not my issue, and I haven't really taken that much um, interest in it. But it is clear, even to the superficial observer, that the story is not delivering the goods, because the claim that somehow Jeffrey Epstein ran or was at the center of some kind of an underage girl trafficking network, that hasn't even remotely been demonstrated. There have been years and years and years in which to show this, and it hasn't been done. Um, we had the case down in Florida. It's now, almost now what 16, 17 years ago, and that that case was pretty flimsy. I remember, the issue was, oh, he got such a sweetheart deal in the case. That was the best that the prosecutors could get. They had very dubious witness testimony to rely on. Epstein, who had money, was able to call upon a dream team of defense lawyers, including Kenneth Starr and Alan Dershowitz. And so basically, they cut a deal. That's what prosecutors do. I mean, if they don't think that their case will prevail because of questionable witnesses, and then these witnesses who are changing their stories all the time, then they cut whatever deal they can. So that was then, but no evidence emerged that there was some kind of a network of child sex trafficking. I mean, the story of this child sex trafficking all really derives from this one person, this Virginia Giuffre, who is a proven fabulist. Not only was she forced to drop her allegations against Alan Dershowitz after she went on accusing him quite graphically of all kinds of sexual acts, and then she was forced to withdraw her accusations. But even then, the memoirs that she wrote, that was already some time ago, her own lawyers called it a work of fiction. So that all of her stories of this club of rich men, billionaires, bankers, whatever, the passing around underage girls, she just made it up. And then all the ones who purport to be victims, the victims of Jeffrey Epstein. Well, they knew Jeffrey Epstein when they were already in their 20s. Virginia Giuffre, I think she claimed that she met Epstein when she was underage, but it's only underage under Florida law. It wasn't underage under UK law, definitely not underage under European law. So even when she alleged that she had an affair with Prince Andrew, at the time it was legal. I mean, she was above the age of consent in the UK, but Andrew has now had his life and reputation fatally damaged over basically unproven allegations, and he has denied um, what she has said. And even that photograph, the famous photograph, which is about the only evidence she ever presented, that somehow there was something between her and Andrew. To me, it looks kind of dodgy. That photograph, it's just, I don't know. It's, I mean, if you look at it, and I mean, I'm not saying that what she's saying about Andrew is false. I'm just saying Andrew denies there was anything between them. And but in the photograph, if you look at where Andrew is looking, he's not looking at the camera in the way that Ghislaine Maxwell and Giuffre are looking. I mean, that doesn't prove that the photograph was doctored, but nonetheless, there's a possibility that it was doctored. He's not looking in the same direction as the two women are looking. But anyway, be that as it may, there's still no evidence that there was the sex trafficking ring, the billionaires club, and least of all, is there evidence that Donald Trump had anything to do with any of that? I mean, all that we know about Trump and Epstein is pretty much what we've always known, and which hasn't been called into question, was that they were friends in the 90s, and then around about 2002, 2003, they had a falling out. Now, what they had a falling out about, that's still in dispute, and it doesn't really matter. Who the hell cares what they had a falling out about? Was it about a real estate deal? Was it that Epstein was poaching on the women who worked at Mar-a-Lago? I mean, who cares? But what we do know is they had a falling out. There's no evidence that they maintained relations afterwards. And again, it was Trump's own Justice Department that reopened the case against Epstein in 2019. I mean, if Trump was so afraid of what Epstein might say about him, Trump wouldn't have signed off on a prosecution of Epstein. I mean, it was always even questionable. I mean, the after remember he had Epstein had signed a non-prosecution agreement with the federal government back in 2008, 2009, and then nonetheless reopened it in 2019. They got around it by saying it's a different jurisdiction or whatever, but I'm sure there would have been ample scope for Epstein's lawyers to challenge that. But nonetheless, it was the Trump Justice Department that reopened the case and essentially ignored the DOJ non-prosecution agreement with Epstein. Um, so, the Democrats are hoping, well, we can really milk this. This is really going to be really damaging to Trump. The problem is that this is the mistake that they made back in the mistake that they made during Trump's first term when they ran with the Russiagate hoax. I mean, it was Russiagate, Russiagate. Right? You know, we're going to get him. There's going to be somewhere some kind of a document, some testimony that Trump and Putin had some kind of an understanding, had an agreement, and that Putin intervened in the election to secure the victory for Trump. They spent how many 3 years? 3 years until the hapless Mueller finally published his report and then made his disastrous uh, testimony before Congress when he obviously had no idea about anything. I mean, so therefore he couldn't possibly have been leading this supposed investigation because he didn't even know what was in his own report. And but the point is they wasted 3 years. I mean, there's plenty to go after Trump on, So and we talked about this in our podcast yesterday with Trump um, getting himself involved in in increase in innumerable international conflicts, getting involved in wars, the very thing that he promised that he wouldn't do. So he had the war against Iran. He promised that he wouldn't do that. Now he's threatening attacking Venezuela. He hasn't extracted the United States from the Ukraine business, and so that's already a negative mark for him. But as it was during the first term, during the first term, there was plenty to go after um, Trump. I mean, he failed to build a wall. That was it. He failed to extract the United States from Afghanistan. He failed to extract the United States from Syria. He failed to improve relations with Russia. Then there was his disastrous embrace of Fauci's nonsense with the lockdowns and everything else. So there was plenty to go after Trump. When the tax cuts that favored the billionaires rather than he, a supposed economic populist, he would be pursuing policies that favored the middle class. He didn't do that. But instead of going after Trump on all of those issues, just like instead of going after Trump, I mean, that in that interview with Laura Ingraham, he seemed completely detached from what Trumpism is supposed to be. I see somebody saying about Nigeria. Well, that's another thing. Yeah, so now he's talking about intervening in Nigeria. What the hell does that have to do with MAGA, with America First, with non-interventionism, with attending to domestic issues? And but instead of that, you're going to go to Jeffrey Epstein. And the Democrats are going to be absolutely caught empty-handed, as they were with with Russiagate, because they're not going to deliver. Just like it was obvious, anyone with the slightest common sense would have known that there was no collusion between Russia and Donald Trump. That Russia did not intervene in the election to swing it to Donald Trump, and that the Democrats are not going to prove it because it didn't happen. So they're not going to find that smoking gun. They're not going to find the document showing it. So the same way, they're not going to find anything. No evidence Trump was involved with sex trafficking with Jeffrey Epstein. It didn't happen. We haven't even found evidence, as I said, we haven't even found evidence that there was any sex trafficking, child sex trafficking. I mean, we know Jeffrey Epstein liked young women, but young women, was a very debatable, how many of them were actually underage. There may have been one or two, but most of the young women who were around Jeffrey Epstein were above the age of consent. I mean, you can certainly say, hey, I don't think it's very nice if middle-aged men prey upon very young women. Okay, you may not like it, and it's probably not a great idea, and it's not very nice. But nonetheless, no one coerced them. These were young women in New York trying to make their way in New York, and figured that being friends with a very, very rich guy who had lots and lots of connections to important people in New York was the way to go about trying to make your way in New York. Hence, lots of young women were hanging around with Jeffrey Epstein. That's what young women do. Just like, why do young women hang around with Harvey Weinstein? Yeah, because Harvey Weinstein promised them movie parts, and he was a very successful movie producer, and so they hung around um, Harvey Weinstein. And Harvey Weinstein, he also did some coerced sex. I doubt whether it was that much of it was coerced, but maybe some of it was coerced. But there's no evidence that Jeffrey Epstein actually coerced sex with these women. In fact, it's clear even from what Ghislaine Maxwell said, everything. He really wasn't that interested in sex. I mean, he had a preoccupation with getting massages. I don't know why, but he seemed to want to get these massages, and he seemed to want to have young women giving him massages. But he was not, uh, you know, that he was not a Harvey Weinstein kind of forcing himself on to have sex with these women. But anyway, be that as it may, I mean, it's not really that important. What's important is that this Epstein scandal, if you want to call it that, isn't going to deliver the goods for the Democrats. They're not going to find any evidence that I mean, they're not interested in finding a sex trafficking scandal. They're not going to find evidence that Trump was involved in this child sex trafficking. And as other people have pointed out, if there were any evidence that Trump was involved with child sex trafficking, then that would have come out during the time that the Democrats ran the Justice Department. Remember, the Democrats ran the Justice Department from the 2021, is it? Yeah, 2021 through to 2025, and they were out to get Trump for something. That the Biden Justice Department. Well, they brought two federal cases in two different jurisdictions, but they were also collaborating on the state cases that were brought against Trump. So a state case in Georgia and the state case um, in New York. So if they really had this, because that would have been really juicy, something we can get Trump on. He was involved in child sex trafficking. So you don't have to come up with his convoluted theories like the one in New York that nobody can even understand what the argument was supposed to be. All the nonsense that he somehow purloined uh, documents that were his documents. That were, he as the chief magistrate, the presiding officer over the U.S. government, he was entitled to these documents. So therefore, that whole idea that somehow he was untoward. He had no right to the documents. They're his documents. The president does not ask permission from the hall monitor or the White House librarian whether he can take out documents. I mean, it's nonsensical, and that's a principle that's always been accepted with presidents. With Bill Clinton, they're his documents. He can do what he likes with them. Now, of course, he can't do it after he's no longer president. But while he's president, he can absolutely do what he wants. He can actually say, "Yeah, these are private documents; they are mine, and no one will have them." I mean, that's what the court found in the case of Bill Clinton. And that's it. Yeah. Somebody says, but George Nixon did give up the tapes. He did give up the tapes, but that was I always thought that was a very dubious decision. Um, Nixon could have fought it. Now he may still have been impeached, but it was very questionable whether the about the tapes. However, the case with the tapes was very narrowly tailored. I mean, they were just trying to use the tapes um, in the prosecution of members of his administration. So the Supreme Court didn't say, "Hey, we have absolute right to all of your papers and your tapes and your documents." They said, "Well, these tapes." I remember they were quite very specific. The prosecutors didn't ask for very specific tapes because they were prosecuting members of his administration, not him, Nixon, but members of his administration. Said, "Well, these tapes have evidence that we can use in these prosecutions." And so the Supreme Court said, well, this is evidence that can be used, and so therefore, Nixon should give them up, but not evidence that can be used against it. But I wasn't very impressed, and have never been very impressed with that ruling. I think it was very, very dubious that courts can intrude on presidential prerogatives, because that would make the courts more important than the executive, and that doesn't work. That's that it's supposed to be tension between the three branches of government. It's no one branch is superior to the others, and so that was a bad. A lot of bad rulings came out in that Nixon era, which suggested that the courts were more important than the executive. And we're seeing it today with all these ridiculous rulings where a judge just declares, "Oh, well, that was, that's illegal. The president's executive order is illegal." Well, who the hell is an unelected judge to say that an elected president's order is illegal? Ooh, Marty! I'm always happy when Marty joins us, because he always presents some very interesting meme. Let's take a look. What is this? What is he showing? Okay, so that is yes. That's a very interesting picture, and the that was very, very God, the name the name of the guy was guys, just remind me of just my mind's gone blank now. I know exactly who this person is. He was the famous um, uh, guy, in New York guy who was supposedly Trump's mentor, and of course he worked for McCarthy. Very, very clever lawyer. Anyway, my mind's just gone blank, but I know exactly who that is. And he was indeed good friends with Trump. Very quite, very Roy Cohn. Thank you, Roy Cohn. Exactly. I was just my mind just went blank. Roy Cohn, and and I think Marty, you not Ray Cohen, Roy Cohn. Marty, I think you posted some time ago on the Gaggle locals board an excerpt of an interview. Well, it was a discussion between Roy Cohn and Gore Vidal, which was very entertaining, because obviously they come at things with from a very different political perspective. Cohn had always been associated with the Republican Party and the right, and then of course, and and but and of course Gore Vidal was sort of associated with the left, but Gore Vidal was really a figure, I think, from the old right. He was, he had that, on the isolationism and national splendor that the old right celebrated. Basically, just Americans should just stay out of war, stay out of other countries' affairs, and as is to be expected from an old right person, that he was against the growth of the overmighty state, which of course goes together with interventionism, wars, and then the attendant spying, surveillance, and repression that goes together with the wars. So that was a very good. I mean, you can still probably find it. I'm sure you can find it on our locals board. This discussion between Gore Vidal and Roy Cohn, and it was interesting. I mean, Cohn, even this happened. I guess took place in the late '70s, and Cohn still defended McCarthy. He still, he still regarded Joe McCarthy as a hero, and 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 then when Gore Vidal sort of suggested that McCarthy was gay, Cohn took umbrage at that. No, 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 no. Absolutely untrue. But anyway, that's all nice to see that. Um, okay, so that's one thing. Okay, that's that Jeffrey Epstein. We've talked about that. The other thing is this ridiculous, idiotic, stupid, dumb, moronic, cretinous story that's making the rounds about this. I don't know if you heard of it. The Sarajevo sniper shot. Yes, no, Sarajevo sniper safari. It's an alliteration. Sarajevo sniper. So if you haven't heard about this, there's some allegation that back in the 90s, so we're going all the way back, 1992, 1993, so that's more than 30 years ago. At the height of the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, uh, there was this apparently people were making money. There was this Italian tourists, but maybe tourists from other countries who were being flown to Sarajevo to take part in a safari hunt. There would be, they would pay money for the privilege of shooting at civilian targets in Sarajevo. So apparently the Bosnian Serbs, were so evil that this was a kind of a lucrative source of revenue for them. That these were Italian tourists and or whatever, they would come there, and they would pay. Like you'd go for a safari. Hey, you want to go and or a hunt rather than just a safari, because safari is just looking at animals. But if you go for a hunt in Africa, you pay, and then you get to shoot elephants. You can even shoot lions. So apparently they paid the Bosnian Serbs money to go shoot people in Sarajevo. I see somebody said Izetbegovic here. Yeah, exactly. Izetbegovic, who was the president of Bosnia and Herzegovina. He wasn't president. This was another nonsensical story that was put out by the media that he was president. He wasn't president. He was, in the first place, there was some kind of a fraud. I mean, he lost the election. He lost the election in 1991. He came in second to Fikret Abdic. And then some kind of a deal was struck by whereby Fikret Abdic stepped aside and Izetbegovic got to be president. So that was that. But then he was only supposed to be president of the presidency of Bosnia and Herzegovina, and he was supposed to circulate among the three nations of Bosnia and Herzegovina. So you serve for 1 year. You're a Muslim. Izetbegovic was a Muslim. He would serve for 1 year, then he would step aside, and then the Serb president would take over, and then the Croat president would take over, and so it was that. But he never stepped aside. He just continued to be holding that position. But none of the media go, oh, the president. He's the president. Um, and now, so that was so that was it. Now, so this is this ridiculous story. Now, it's very important to keep in mind that what was going on in Sarajevo at this time. Sarajevo was the base of the Muslim army. The Muslim army was located in Sarajevo, so there was no sniping at civilians. This was a fighting that was going on. The Serbs were fighting against the Muslim army based in Sarajevo. But but there was this fraud that was perpetrated whereby Sarajevo was declared a safe area, as were other towns in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which was Srebrenica, famously, it was Žepa, Tuzla, and Bihać. They were all declared because they were all basically they were the location of Muslim armies, and they were declared to be safe areas, which was very, very clever because the idea behind it was that if you have these towns, which are dominated by the Muslims, particularly if they were behind Serbian lines, that prevents any real settlement of the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina, because the Western powers had said, "Oh no, we have to maintain the unity of Bosnia and Herzegovina, even though the only way this war could ever be settled is if there were a partition." So they say, well, we can't have a partition because, look, Srebrenica and Žepa are behind Serbian lines. And of course, Sarajevo, it was contested, but you say, oh, it's Sarajevo. Hey, well, that's a safe area. But the way the media presented it, oh, well, the Serbs are just sniping. They were just shooting. Because they're Serbs, they're evil monsters. That's what they did. They just was sniping. But it's very interesting. So after 30 years, this issue has come back. Suddenly, oh, we're talking about how evil the Serbs are, but now apparently they roped in others into their evil schemes. So let's take a look first at what this whole Serbian sniper safari claim is all about. So here are the story, and here's the Guardian. And Milan prosecutors investigate alleged sniper tourism during Bosnian war. And here, prosecutors in Milan have opened an investigation into Italians who allegedly paid members of the Bosnian Serb army for trips to Sarajevo so that they could kill citizens during the 4-year siege of the city in the 1990s. More than 10,000 people were killed in Sarajevo by constant shelling and sniper fire. That's right. And then the snipers were perhaps the most feared element. So this is the Guardian, recycling its stories from the 1990s. Most feared element of life under siege. Why was it under siege? They never explained why was Sarajevo under siege. Gee, because that was where the Bosnian Muslim army was based. Because they would pick off people, groups of Italians and other nationalities, so-called sniper tourists. So now already snow-called, as if this is some real thing. We've now already established that it's a real thing. Sniper tourists are alleged to have participated in the massacre after paying large sums of money to soldiers belonging to the army of Radovan Karadzic. Who in 2016 was found guilty of genocide and other crimes against humanity, and so to be transported to hills surrounding Sarajevo so that they could shoot at the population for pleasure. Of course, that's just what people do. Hey, I just want to go kill some people. Nice. Milan prosecutors, led by Alessandro Gobi, launched an investigation aimed at identifying the Italians. So remember, this happened 30 years ago. And now they're saying, oh, we're going to launch this investigation. 30 years later, apparently for 30 years, no one knew anything about this. And suddenly we're launching this investigation. What happened? Why suddenly now What new evidence has come forward? And says the investigation originated from a legal complaint submitted by Ezio Gavazzini, a Milan based writer who gathered evidence on the allegations, as well as a report sent to the prosecutors by former mayor of Sarajevo, Ben Yamina Karic. So therefore, you got a Muslim mayor of Sarajevo. Now, Gavazzini has absolutely no credibility whatsoever. You can just look it up on the internet. You don't have to take my word for it. He has no credibility. This is a guy who claimed that the Armenians were behind the assassination attempt on Pope John Paul II. So nobody takes him seriously. But apparently, the Milan prosecutors decided to take up his allegations. Gavazzini said he had first read reports about the alleged sniper tourists in an Italian press in the 1990s, but it was not until he watched Sarajevo Safari, so a 2022 documentary by a Slovenian director, Miran Županic, that he began to investigate further. So he watches a documentary by a Slovenian director about how evil the Serbs are and said, well, I got to find out more about this. In the documentary, a former Serb soldier and contractor claimed that groups of Westerners would shoot at the civilian population from the hills around Sarajevo. Its claims have been vehemently denied by Serbian war veterans. That's always the kind of they insert that in because no one's going to take it seriously. Well, of course the Serbs were going to deny it, but it's a pro forma thing to show how balanced they are. But they don't take it seriously. Sarajevo Safari was the starting point. I began a correspondence with the director, and from there expanded my investigation until I collected enough material to present to the Milan prosecutors. Gavazzini, so he collects the material, and the Milan prosecutors say, "Oh, thank you very much." So why is he doing this? I mean, why he's supposed to be a writer. Why doesn't he write a book about this? Why is he collecting evidence for the Milan prosecutors? And the Milan prosecutors say, "Whoa, thank you very much, Squire. We'll get right on it. We'll open an investigation into this." Gavazzini claimed many Italians were alleged to have been involved, without providing a figure. There were Germans, French, English people from all over, because apparently it's something that's very popular. Lots of people apparently want to go just go kill people at random. Apparently there's a huge market for this. Gavazzini added, there were no political or religious motivations. They were rich people who went there for fun and personal satisfaction. We are talking about people who love guns and who perhaps go to shooting ranges or on safari in Africa. There is a difference between shooting ranges, but okay. Anyway, he claimed the Italian suspects would meet at the northern city of Trieste, travel to Belgrade, from where Bosnian Serb soldiers would accompany them to the hills of Sarajevo. And there was a traffic of war tourists who went there to shoot people. I call it an indifference towards evil. But okay, can you name anyone? Have you? Is there a name and a face to go with that? Have you found anyone who actually did this? No, you just simply throwing this out there, and the media are just running with it. They're just lapping up this idiotic story. No one's bothering to see, is there evidence? Oh, no, there was a movie. Somebody made a movie. He then watches the movie and then says, oh, I found all this evidence. What evidence? Gavazzini said he had identified some of the Italian individuals alleged to have been involved and who are expected to be questioned by the prosecutors in the coming weeks. So he had identified them. It's so nice that he had done this. Has he actually confronted them? Has he asked them as supposedly an investigative journalist? Wouldn't that be the next thing to do, is to go and interview them? So, this is from one of the finest books ever written on the war in Yugoslavia, Bombs for Peace, NATO's Humanitarian War in Yugoslavia, by yours truly. And I kind of looked this up just about the Bosnia and Herzegovina, and I just read a few things out here. Several things should be noted about the safe areas. First, they weren't safe for Serbs. In fact, there were no Serbs living there since most of them had been ethnically cleansed beforehand. Second, since by 1993 it had become clear that any kind of agreement to end the war in Bosnia would have to entail some kind of partition, the creation of Muslim enclaves deep inside Serb inhabited territory could only make resolution of the conflict impossible without the use of force. Either the Muslims would have to defeat the Serbs to create a link between Muslim territory and the enclaves, or the Serbs would have to eliminate the enclaves altogether. Third, the prerequisite of a safe area in wartime is that it be disarmed. It is unreasonable to demand that one side desist from attacking an area if it is itself under attack from the very same area. The Bosnian Serbs could scarcely be expected to eschew attacking a town that was in reality a soldier's training ground and an armory. Then, the preservation and strengthening of these safe areas was an essential part of Muslim strategy. While use of safe areas to push back Serb forces to any significant degree was unlikely to be successful, the presence of Muslim enclaves deep in Serb held territory would serve the important purpose of immediately invalidating any peace plan proposing partition of Bosnia along contiguous lines. This was a political and military objective, not a humanitarian one. Yet the issue, as presented to the Western public, was that preservation of the safe areas was essential to the physical survival of refugees. The safe areas soon became something other than gatherings of civilians fleeing the fighting. Sarajevo, for example, served as the home base of the First Corps. And then here's how the ICTY, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, itself described the Sarajevo safe area. In 1993, some 75,000 troops, just 75,000 troops of the First Corps were placed within the confrontation lines around Sarajevo. The 75,000. So that's a big army in Sarajevo. Approximately half of them were positioned in the city itself, while the other half was positioned along the confrontation lines outside the city. The confrontation lines remained relatively static. So this is the ICTY speaking. So I'm quoting the ICTY, that it's from their own judgment. The media, oh, they were just shooting at innocent civilians. That was just, these were refugees. And then Tuzla was home to the Second Corps. The 28th Division was based in Srebrenica. The 5th Corps was based in Bihać. The commander of the 5th Corps, General Ativ Dudakovic, according to Rose, that's General Sir Michael Rose, who was one of the generals who commanded UNPROFOR. This is the UN mission in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So Rose said that the commander, General Atif Dudakovic, according to Rose, demonstrated his total disregard for the safety of his people by placing his headquarters in the middle of a town to protect himself from Serb mortar and artillery fire. That's the commanding officer of the UN. He showed complete disregard for the safety of his people. None of this was a secret. In his May the 30th, 1995 report, Boutros Ghali, who was then the UN Secretary General, wrote, "The headquarters and logistics installations of the Fifth Corps of the government army are located in the town of Bihać and those of the Second Corps in the town of Tuzla. The government also maintains a substantial number of troops in Srebrenica, in this case in violation of the demilitarization agreement, Gorazde and Žepa, while Sarajevo is the location of the general command of the government army and other military installations. There is also an ammunition factory in Gorazde." So this is Boutros Ghali is saying these are not, in any sense, civilian gatherings. The safe area, which the UN Secretary, the UN Security Council, under pressure from the disgusting Madeleine Albright and the useless, weak, pathetic, contemptible Russians, who were, at the time, this was the heyday of Yeltsinism, and they went along with this when they knew this is the Secretary General of the UN is telling them these are not safe areas, and they were, oh, well, we're safe areas; they need to be protected. And as General Charles Boyd described it, the Muslims have consistently tried to use the United Nations and NATO with the attendant safe areas, no-fly zones, exclusion zones, and demilitarized zones as a shield, allowing themselves to weaken their forces in one area while concentrating their forces elsewhere. In the winter of 1993-94, the Sarajevo government stripped the capital's defenses to release troops to fight against the Croats in central Bosnia, counting on their public diplomacy effort to manage the risks of Sarajevo. It was a near run thing, but in the end, the city was protected by the threat of NATO airstrikes and the imposition of a heavy weapons exclusion zone. And then, now here was then, so that was that, I strongly urge, I don't want to toot my own horn here, but I strongly urge everyone to read my book, Bombs for Peace, NATO's Humanitarian War in Yugoslavia, where I talk a great deal about this, the reality of this, the siege of Sarajevo, what the siege of Sarajevo was about, and of course, the the key event, which was, of course, Srebrenica. But you can't expect anything from media. And now, so the Telegraph, a truly disgusting paper. So Telegraph also seized on this story and says wealthy foreigners paid £80,000 for weekend safaris to kill civilians in Sarajevo. It's other head, again, they talk here about this. An investigation has been launched into claims that gun enthusiasts and far-right extremists traveled to the war-torn city in the 1990s with sniper rifles to pick off terrifying Bosnians for fun. Well, if they're sort of gun enthusiasts and far-right extremists, how do they get their hands on £80,000 for a weekend safari? That's serious money. So we're talking about wealthy foreigners. Are these far right extremists and gun enthusiasts? Are they that wealthy that they can just toss around £80,000 for a weekend safari? The foreigners from Italy, the US, Russia, and elsewhere are accused of paying Serbian forces to take part in the shooting spree during the Bosnian War. They were allegedly motivated by sympathy for the Serbian cause, sheer bloodthirstiness, or a combination of the two, investigators say. So that's different from what this guy that they're basing it on had alleged. The guy who's made up this story, he said, "Oh, it was just about money. They was sadism, but there was never any particular sympathy for the Serbian cause." The Telegraph says, "Oh, it's a Serbian cause." Then he says here, Serbia has denied the claims. Now, notice right away the idiocy of the Telegraph, because they first of all they talk here about terrified Bosnians. So now, there was no such thing as a Bosnian. I mean, that just shows their own idiocy. That you had the three nations, you had the Muslims, the Croats, and the Serbs. Bosnia and Herzegovina was really kind of an administrative region of Yugoslavia. So there was no such thing as a Bosnian. And the Bosnians were not a constituent nation of Yugoslavia. The Bosnia and Herzegovina was a republic of Yugoslavia, but there was not one of the six constituent nations of Yugoslavia. So there was no such nation as Bosnians. Anymore, there's a nation called the Kosovars. These are all just made up um, during the 90s. But the thing here is that so he makes up this Bosnian, and then he says Serbia has denied the claim. So this is a pro forma just to show that we asked what the Serbs said. Why you bring this up with Serbia? This was a war that was going on in Bosnia and Herzegovina. So if you're saying that it was Radovan Karadzic who was inviting these people to come to Bosnia and Herzegovina, then take it up with the people who are the leaders of the Republika Srpska. Why talk about Serbia? It just shows how ignorant and idiotic they are. They say, "Oh, Serbia has denied the claims." And this has nothing to do with Serbia. This is about the war in Bosnia and Herzegovina. Um, anyway, it says, but witnesses and Italian investigators claim that there was even a price list for the targeted killings. Foreigners would pay more to shoot children and men who were armed in uniform. This is all Italian investigators. Who are these witnesses? They've now completely made this stuff up. You're saying these witnesses. Who are these witnesses? Italian investigators already have claimed. So who are these foreigners? You're making a claim that they would pay more to shoot children. You can imagine, I'm ready to pay, £85,000 if I can shoot a child. Well, okay, can you imagine such nonsense? And who are they? Where are these people who were paid this just to shoot children? The amateur snipers paid the modern day equivalent of €80,000 to €100,000 to take part in the chilling sport, according to La Repubblica newspaper. And then the Italians are said to have gathered in the northeastern border city of Trieste and were transported to the hills surrounding Sarajevo during the 1992-96 siege of the city. Actually, it was 95, so they can't even get the date right. That came to an end in 95. The battle, which killed more than 11,500 people, was the longest in modern European history, surpassing the 872-day German siege of Leningrad. So they bring it. This is a classic. They bring up this Leningrad. This is the siege. There was a war that was going on there. This was the headquarters of the Bosnian Muslim Army, the siege of Leningrad. But this is what they do. They want to liken this to Leningrad. War tourists of various nationalities, including Americans and Russians, were allegedly allowed to shoot at civilians by Bosnian Serb militias under the command of the warlord Radovan Karadzic. Now, just about everything here is wrong. There was not Bosnian Serb militias. There was an army, the VRS, the army of the Republika Srpska. So they weren't militias. And they weren't under the command of the warlord Radovan Karadzic. He wasn't a warlord. He was the president of the Republika Srpska. They were under the command of General Mladic. Anyway, then he says prosecutors in Milan are trying to identify Italians who were allegedly involved in the killings and could bring charges of voluntary homicide aggravated by cruelty and abject motives. So they're talking in this way, and they're trying to identify the Italians. So they don't even have anyone that any name that can go with this. And then it says they are being assisted by officers from a specialist unit of the Carabinieri police known as the Raggruppamento Operativo Speciale. So they put all this in. Oh, that sounds very, very important. Very, very Italian as well. Then it says similar claims have been made in the past, but have now resurfaced thanks to the formal legal case launched by Benjamina Karic, a former mayor of Sarajevo, against persons unknown. So so you're bringing up again this former mayor of Sarajevo, obviously a political actor, hardly therefore the most reliable. And then an entire team of tireless people are fighting to have this complaint heard, she told the Italian news agency. And then the case has been taken up by an Italian journalist, and this Ezio Gabazzini. There was a price tag for these killings. Children cost more than men, preferably in uniform, and armed women, and finally old people who could be killed for free. There was a price tag for these. Children cost more than men, preferably finally old people who could be killed for free. So apparently you didn't have to pay anyone to kill an old man. Oh, that's a bonus. Um, now, Mr. Gavazzini went on to say he was horrified to think that wealthy middle class Italians would travel to Bosnia and pay to kill human beings for sport. So he'd be horrified, but he doesn't have any evidence of this. They departed Trieste for a manhunt, and when they came home and continued their normal lives, they were respectable in the opinion of those who knew them. Foreigners who traveled to Sarajevo to snipe at civilians had played God and have remained unpunished. He told La Repubblica. He's got this, yeah. The killings were reportedly carried out with the connivance of Serbian intelligence. Again, this is so they carried out with the connivance. Really, you I mean, now this is you just sort of making this up. Is there any evidence for this? The ICTY pursued the Serbs with a vengeance for decades. Then they never seem to come up with any of this. That's amazing. That would have been, the cherry on the cake if they could have come up that how evil the Serbs were, that they were organizing these safaris, sniper safaris in Sarajevo. Bang, we've got Karadzic, we've got Mladic, we've got Milosevic. This is what they were doing. And strange, all this time they never came up with this. I guess it must have been a cover up. They did it. They wanted to cover this up. Prosecutors will examine the testimony of a former Bosnian intelligence officer, Reed, member of the armed forces of Bosnia, so therefore a Muslim, who gathered information about the alleged weekend snipers from a captured Serbian soldier. Okay, so you're going to the armed forces of the Bosnian Muslims, but for some strange reason, he kept quiet about this for more than 30 years. He didn't go to the ICTY and volunteer this information. He gathered this information from a captured Serbian soldier. That was nice of the captured Serbian soldier to divulge all this. The former agent Edin Shubasic said that during the questioning, the Serbian soldier said Italians had paid to fire snipers. And now they bring up this case, which is quite interesting. This former U.S. Marine, John Jordan, he testified at the UN-led ad hoc, this is ICTY, that tourist shooters traveled to Sarajevo to take pot shots at civilians for their own gratification. They, of course, don't mention what was the context at which he made this testimony. He testified during the trial of Dragomir Milosevic. There's no relation to Slobodan. Anyway, he testified. He said that he had seen one foreigner show up with a weapon that seems more suited to wild boar hunting in the Black Forest than to urban combat in the Balkans, and added that the individual handled the weapon like a novice. The presence of weekend snipers reportedly confirmed by Italian agency. So let's look at the transcript. Let's go to the transcript of the Dragomir Milosevic trial. And here he's being cross-examined by Milosevic's attorney. So she asks him, in your statement, you talk about tourist shooters. After that, you talk about burgermeisters who would pay money to go to Sarajevo to shoot people from the Serb side. Mr. Jordan, do you remember having said that in your statement? Yes, ma'am. Then question. In August of last year, and could you tell us where you got this information from at the time? I had witnessed on more than one occasion personnel who did not appear to me to be locals by their dress, by the weapons they carried, by the way they were being handled, guided around by the locals. I saw this in Sarajevo on a number of occasions. Some of my other personnel had seen it in the Mostar area. The term Burgermeisters is a slang term that refers to the fact that Croatia, being allied, friendly, i.e., Germany, that's where the tourists came from on that side. Up by us, kind of hard to get a tourist into Sarajevo to shoot uphill, so the tourists shot downhill. Right, so he's claiming this, they're coming from Germany. Um, and I understand that you established a visual distinction between the locals and the foreigners in Sarajevo. This is what I can conclude on the basis of your statement. Is this true? Did you actually establish this distinction? You can assume from my statement that I am a trained observer and can tell when one guy who is obviously not familiar with an area is being led literally almost by the hand around an area by people who are familiar in it. So he's going entirely by, he didn't talk to anyone, he didn't ask anyone, he was going visually. He can suddenly see, yeah, obviously these aren't locals. Okay. This is where the term tourist shooter came from. The guy was not from the neighborhood. He did not carry arms that were typical of the neighborhood. Precisely, this is the question. Precisely. You saw these people doing the job. I never saw one of these tourist shooters take a shot. Oh. He never actually saw one of these tourist shooters take a shot. I just saw them being handled and moved around known sniper positions. So you saw them moved around the sniper position, but never actually saw anyone take a shot. How do you know those sniper positions? I never actually saw one take a shot. But again, it was clearly obvious that one person being led by men who were familiar with the ground was completely unfamiliar with the ground, and his manner of dress and the weapons they carried led me to believe that they were tourist shooters. He was led to believe. So he's making an inference here. Not on any evidence, he's making it inferences. It was an expression that I ran into for the first time in Beirut, where we saw the same thing happening around the Green Line. Yes, precisely. How were these tourist shooters dressed? Well, in fact, they wore civilian military combination type clothing, but mostly it was the weapon. Anyone can go to a surplus store and outfit himself to look like anybody else's army, but the locals carried certain weapons, and when a guy shows up with a weapon that looks more like he ought to be hunting boar in the Black Forest than in urban combat in the Balkans, when you see him being handled, and you can obviously tell he's a novice at moving around the rubble. If he walks like a duck, talks like a duck, it's a duck. How the hell does it going to conclude that these are Germans or these are Italians or whatever? It could just be, there were some militia who were seconded by the Serb army. They were kind of unfamiliar, and they had hunting rifles. They were basically, this was militias who would join the fighting. They were under the command of the Republika Srpska army, but he's drawing all these conclusions not on having spoken to anyone. He says, well, they seemed unfamiliar with the area, and they were kind of carrying odd weapons. Yeah, the hunting rifles. Yeah, well, there was a lot of that. It was a civil war. A lot of people were taking up hunting rifles. I mean, these are guns that they had. Yeah, so you have a hunting rifle. Oh well, because they weren't really they weren't proper army weapons. They were hunting rifles. Yeah, that's exactly what there was. The wars in the Bosnia and Herzegovina. There were people taking up. They joined the fighting, and they grabbed what weapon they had, which was a hunting rifle. And then the Telegraph then saw Tim Tudor, a veteran British expert on the Balkans, wrote a pretty lousy book, but okay. And he says, from 1992 to 95, I spent a lot of time in Pale, which was the HQ of Bosnian Serb forces, and I didn't hear about it, he told the Telegraph. We didn't notice strange foreigners turning up. There were some Russians and Greeks, but they were fighting on the Serb side as military volunteers. I'm not saying it didn't happen. It's possible there were people willing to pay to do this, but I don't think the numbers would have been very large. All right, so that's the this nonsensical stories that, of course, the media running with, because oh, that's it. It's good. You can get the bash the subs, which is always um, always a lot of fun, and then and then you can start all the investigations, maybe bring the Russians in somehow. Anyway, let's now take a look at our locals page, and this is our locals community, the people who make uh, the, um, the gaggle what it is. They help contribute to the tip jar to keep the dogs satisfied to the extent that they can be satisfied. They're not very happy. And so let's take a look at some of the questions from the Gagglers. And so, first question from Vic Shakapopoulos says, Dear George, given you're such a cinephile, have you ever been to a film festival? Yeah, I kind of been to film festivals. Not that many, but yeah, I've been to them, and they're always quite entertaining. I was at when been a few times, well, to the New York film festivals, um, and it's not my thing really. And while it is true that I am a cinephile, but I'm not such a huge fan of newer movies. So the whole point of film festivals is that they're a showcase for new young talent, and I'm not really that interested in new young talent. However new, young, or talented it is, I kind of like older films, and so so it's not really my thing. I mean, though, you do get some fine films at the film festivals, but it really isn't my thing. If, however, there's a in some cinema, there's a showcase for, I don't know, some film director or movie star from a bygone era, I would probably go to that. Go to a few of those showings, and somebody, oh, this is a season of Ida Lupino. Most people haven't heard of Ida Lupino, but she was quite a big figure in Hollywood at the time. She was a movie actress and was one of the first um, film directors of female film directors. So Ida Lupino, was directed movies. So I would go to something like that. But what are the young talented filmmakers making today? It's gonna be hard to get me motivated to go. Anyway, thanks for the question. And I keep looking at this picture of Roy Cohn. Um, I mean, the interesting thing about this picture, Marty, and again, Marty, thank you as always for your generosity. Is the Cohn is is showing you this. He seems very proud of his association with Trump. Now, Cohn, as far as I recall, he died around 1987, something around there. And so it's surprising that he should be so proud of his association with Trump, because at the time, Trump was primarily known for his real estate dealings. He had acquired a reputation, and I think it is important to remember why he became as famous as he was. So that was before the the show The Apprentice. So before The Apprentice, you said, why was he famous? Well, he kind of acquired the reputation of the man who rescued New York City. You know, I mean, obviously, he didn't individually rescue it, but he got this reputation that somehow New York was in such dire straits in the 1970s. You remember they were, they had the budget and they couldn't, they didn't have the money, and they had to go to the federal government and ask President Ford for money, to bail out New York City. And then, of course, Ford said no. Why should I do that? And then that's when the famous Daily News headline, "Ford to New York, drop dead." So that was that, and then of course there was the crime spree. You had all those films, the Death Wish movies, and so it was really, everything about New York just seemed like was it was a dying city. You can see it uh, in that Martin Scorsese movie, Taxi Driver. Just this is just awful. And but somehow then Trump became associated with the revival of the city, and I think that was the basis of his original fame. With the whole Volman rink, and then he had these deals um, with the Grand Hyatt and so on. So that's kind of his initial claim to fame. So this has to be before 1987, because I think that's when he died. So by for him to be so proud of his association with Trump, you have to think, well, he's the only reason why he'd be so proud with Trump is that he somehow he had a reputation, I think, obviously of a successful real estate guy, but that he somehow helped revive New York. But no, it's just an interesting picture as to why would he be so proud of his association with Trump. Anyway, thank you, Marty. Dale Owens, nice to see you again, Dale. Haven't seen you in a while. Dale says, "What did you make of Julian Jackson's book about the Patan trial? He was one of my lecturers in the University of Wales." Already, so that's interesting. I thought it was quite an interesting book because the question really is, what crime did Patan commit? Let's keep in mind the France had been defeated in the war. France sued for peace, and and then essentially the French National Assembly then turned to Pétain to be the head of state. He was then became the leader of France. Now he and he was the law. I mean, this was the French National Assembly. That was an elected body, and he became the president. So what law exactly did he break? I mean, the French National Assembly was acting in accordance with the Constitution. So if you say, well, he committed treason, on what basis did he commit treason? Now, France could have, I suppose, continued fighting, but that wasn't Pétain's decision. It wasn't Pétain who made that decision to stop fighting. You can argue whether was it a good idea to go on fighting against Germany after the army had been defeated, or not a good idea. But either way, Pétain wasn't the one who made that decision. He wasn't head of state. He didn't command the French armed forces. He didn't make that decision. So that was a decision that was made essentially to sue for peace. And he didn't sign the agreement with the Wehrmacht, I guess the humiliating agreement with the Wehrmacht um, after the defeat. So Petain really, was took up his position at the request of the French National Assembly. So, and they were acting in accordance with the Constitution, and therefore you'd have to then ask, well, what is his crime? What exactly was he supposed to do at that moment? He says, well, I acted in accordance with French law and the French Constitution. I acted because of this is the French National Assembly, which had been elected. Essentially, they asked me to be the head of state, and then I was basically the head of state of this France. France had to survive. You lose a war, you still have to survive. You have a responsibility to ensure the survival of your state and your people. Um, and so I thought that Jackson, he did quite a good job in highlighting that very issue. What exactly was Petain's crime? Um, basically he was charged with treason, and it's hard to see where's the treason. What treason did he commit? He wasn't working for the Germans. He didn't in any way undermine the French military in 1940. He didn't sue for peace, um, and he didn't do anything at all in the interests of Germany. He said all I did was to act in the interests of France, a France that had been defeated. So I thought that the book was quite good in highlighting. It's very easy. Oh, well, Petain, is you know treasonous, treacherous. Is working for the enemy. But when you actually get down to it, under what law do you charge him? And he said, well, I was the head of state. I was the law. That's the way the Constitution works. Um, but it was inevitable. The fix was in, and that they were going to find him guilty, and then sentence him to death. But then it became interesting that having sentenced him to death, the court immediately asked for clemency, and de Gaulle himself granted clemency. Almost immediately was granted clemency. So in other words, he was imprisoned for life. And he was very old by then. He was already, I think, 89 by the time he was convicted. So he was already very much an elderly man. It was, I think, clearly it was already senile. Um, so during his imprisonment, he died. He lived on for another few years, but essentially it was a hospital. He needed kind of round the clock care because of his age and infirmity. Um, and I think de Gaulle felt. I think he felt some attachment to Petain. Petain had been his commanding officer at Verdun in 1916, and so he just felt that that Petain had made a mistake. But it's hard to say. To say he was treacherous, he committed treason against whom? Whom did he commit treason? The French state did not regard the French state that he took over, the National Assembly that asked him to be the president. That was the elected body. That was the National Assembly that had been the legally constituted body according to the Constitution of the Third Republic, and they made him president. De Gaulle had no basis for claiming he was anything. He was just a government in exile in London. He wasn't even a government in Paris, in France. It's not like de Gaulle. Okay, well, I've got a I'm occupying some piece of territory in France, and this is the real government. De Gaulle had no basis for claiming that he was the government. So the French basis somehow, well, this is legally constituted. This new government now presiding in Paris, the de Gaulle, which basically he only de Gaulle's only claim to be president was simply that he was the guy in London. So he was hoisted into power because of the Allied invasion of France, and they put him in charge. But there was no legal basis for it. So for that, this government of de Gaulle to sit in judgment on Petain, I mean, it's very dubious. I mean, de Gaulle wasn't president of anything. I mean, he had no legal basis for claiming he was president. Petain had far more legal basis for it. So it was a highly dubious enterprise. Leave aside the whole issue of clemency. It was dubious. It was de Gaulle really wasn't legally president of anything. I mean, there had been no election that he could say, "Well, I'm now the elected president of France." So, I think the book was interesting in highlighting those legal aspects of this. Um, but I think it was interesting that well, Petain was treated rather well, not kindly, but I think at least his life was spared. But Pierre Laval, his life was not spared. He was executed. But the same logic would apply. I mean, if it was dubious to charge Petain with treason, then it's kind of dubious to charge Laval with treason, because it's the same idea that France had sued for peace. The legally constituted government of France had sued for peace, and so therefore the post armistice agreement was the government of the after the armistice agreement was the legally constituted government. It was that was the legally constituted government, and they made their decisions in accordance with their legal and constitutional justifications. De Gaulle had no basis of anything. I mean, you could say de Gaulle was a hero, but de Gaulle was in London. If you're in London, I mean, you don't really rule anything. I mean, how can you call yourself the government of France when you're sitting in London? I mean, as I said, he didn't even occupy any part of France. You could say, well, at least we're in charge in Nice, or in Brittany or whatever. I mean, he's not really anything. I mean, it's very just when you start these kinds of trials, you very quickly find that the legal basis for these trials are very dubious. Um, it's if people want to read more on this subject, they should read the dissenting opinion, a very lengthy dissenting opinion on the Tokyo War Crimes Tribunal, written by an Indian judge, I think Rabindranath Pal, Pal. Which, as I said, it was very lengthy, but he called into question, pretty much the entirety of the prosecution's case. What is the legal basis for doing? I mean, you are essentially doing what you're not supposed to do, which is making ex post facto law, and that's the same thing happened with Petain. You're making ex post facto law. Petain did nothing illegal, whereas but de Gaulle has no basis for claiming that he was the legally constituted government. So I thought that, just to answer your question, Jackson's book was quite interesting in highlighting these legal dilemmas. That's about as far as you can ever take it, because the World War II narratives are so firmly entrenched that nobody really wants to start challenging them. Of course, you say, "Oh, this was terrible. Petain, terrible. Laval, terrible. Vichy, horrible." But if you're going to do this, then say, um, what is the legal basis for this? Anyway, thank you. Anne Marie, always very good to see you. Thank you so much, Anne Marie. Such a pleasure to have you with us. Anne Marie, as I always say, is our resident musical expert, scholar, practitioner, very, very distinguished musician. Plays, in the finest orchestras in the world, plays with the finest composers, conductors, finest performers in the world, and has an amazing breadth of knowledge and experience of music, both modern, of the 20th and 21st centuries, but also obviously going back a ways. And we're always very fortunate to have her contributing to our board and allowing us to enjoy her expertise and all her insights and observations. So it really is it's such a great pleasure to read, learned commentary on our musical offerings for the Gaggle Music Club. So I'm always so looking forward to Anne Marie's comments and observations. So thank you so much, Anne Marie. It's a real a real pleasure to have you here. Thank you. Um, and Robert says, however bad the Energo atom scandal is, so this is about Ukraine, it's unlikely to create another Chernobyl. Okay, Chernobyl was a lethal mix of secrecy, falsified reports, fear of the party that made a meltdown almost inevitable. Energo atom problem is completely different. Inflated contracts, shell firms, and kickbacks. Chinese parts billed at European prices, but probably won't lead to catastrophe. Maybe Steve K9, who seems to have a knowledge of the nuclear industry, can weigh in. Well, I agree. But as I've said before, when we deal with these issues of Ukrainian corruption, we have to be very, very careful where all this is going. So there's a lot of a lot of people in the alt media, they start rejoicing whenever they read this. This confirms everything we've said. Zelensky is corrupt. All the cronies around Zelensky, they're corrupt. This is it. This is all confirmation. The thing is, one has to you know, take a very skeptical view of this. Not because I'm saying Zelensky is not corrupt, um, but that there's a struggle that goes on in Ukraine. There is the kind of Zelensky who was originally hoisted into power by local oligarchs. His patron was Kolomoisky. Um, and they had their own agenda, and I think Kolomoisky wanted, and we've talked about this before, and there's plenty of serious evidence of this. I think Kolomoisky in 2016, 2017, 2018, and all the way up to 2019 when Zelensky was elected, Kolomoisky wanted to have come to some kind of a settlement with Russia. And he was saying that this war in the Donbass makes no sense for Ukraine. Obviously, it made no sense for him because it affected his bottom line. But I think the reason why Kolomoisky and I think other local oligarchs pushed Zelensky in 2019, because they thought Poroshenko would want to continue this war. Zelensky was a chance to end this war, and Zelensky ran on this platform of reconciliation with the residents of the Donbass, and of course reconciliation with Russia, and he won overwhelmingly. He absolutely crushed Poroshenko. Now, the EU and the United States were not exactly happy about Zelensky's victory, because I think there was a real fear that Zelensky was going to bring this war with Russia to an end. So we're going back. This is 2019. And Zelensky really did make moves at that time to bring things to an end, and then it was made clear to him that this would be unacceptable. So the reason I bring this up is that there's a clearly always been a conflict because Zelensky was not trusted by the Europeans, and he wasn't trusted by the Americans. They thought Zelensky was Kolomoisky's boy, and that he was going to work out some sort of a deal with Russia. So now you have this faction within Ukraine, which has never trusted Zelensky, but they want the war to go on. These anti-corruption zealots, they are very anti-Russian, and they want the war to continue. So there's been for a long time this tension between these anti-corruption activists around NABU. This was the thing that was set up by the Americans and the Europeans. They set up this NABU. Not the whole purpose of NABU is to control Ukraine, not because they give a damn about corruption. The whole idea that the Europeans care about corruption is ridiculous. But it's a mechanism for keeping the Ukraine's leaders, and particularly Zelensky, keep him in line. So the idea of rejoicing about what NABU did, NABU is just a way of just applying pressure against Zelensky. It's the means whereby all of the Sorosites, all of the NGOs, all of the EU can keep control of Ukraine. So this is a very lucrative enterprise, NABU. So a lot of the young people who are ambitious and would like to move from Ukraine and start making a lot of money working in Brussels or in America or anywhere else, they associate themselves with NABU. You remember when Zelensky first had his confrontation with NABU in July, and then we looked at the pictures of the people who were demonstrating, and what did we notice? They're all young girls. Why are these young girls so upset about corruption in Ukraine? They're not upset about corruption in Ukraine. They are upset with the idea that Zelensky was going to bring NABU to an end. That was the meal ticket. That's if you're associated with NABU and all the NGOs that are around NABU, you make a lot of money. But even more important than making a lot of money, you get to start traveling abroad. You become one of the favored people of Ursula von der Leyen. So these anti-corruption types, they just don't really like Zelensky, and they never have liked Zelensky. They've always, they just they've never trusted Zelensky. So you got to keep in mind. I think Zelensky in 2019 did want to reconcile with Russia. I think it was made clear to him, if you try to do that, you will be killed. In 2022, when he again tried to do that, in Istanbul, I think he really wanted to end the war and work out an agreement with Russia. It was made clear to him, that was by Boris Johnson and by Biden, you will be killed. You will not survive. So this whole thing, this thing with this corruption, none of this is to be taken seriously. This is part of an internal struggle within Ukraine, whereby the EU wants to make sure that Zelensky toes the line. Zelensky knows which side his bread is buttered, and that's why. You remember when they really made their move after July, when he didn't. Remember, he didn't actually ban NABU. He just said NABU will be brought under the control of the president, which is kind of makes sense. I mean, it's a governmental agency, and it should be answerable to the president. And then this whole absolute uproar, obviously sponsored by the EU, said no, NABU is an independent agency, and how dare you bring it under the control of the government? And Zelensky blinked. Zelensky, under pressure from the EU, he reversed his own legislation. You remember, this was a legislation that he had pushed to bring Nabu under his control. He basically reversed the legislation. That was because of the pressure from the EU. Now, the people who are rejoicing about these claims of corruption, they have to accept that this body, Nabu, totally a creation of the EU, acts as an agency of the EU, that they're on the level, that what they're doing is somehow truthful, that they really are interested in getting to the bottom of corruption. No, this is an internal fight within Ukraine, and a way to keep Zelensky under control. So, and all the nonsense, all the absolute idiotic, ridiculous nonsense that Zelensky is on the way out is laughable. Zelensky is not on the way out. They're not going to overthrow Zelensky for a very good reason. Zelensky does everything that he's told to do. When they told him, hey, you don't mess with Nabu, you don't mess with these NGOs, you don't mess with the Sorosites because they work for us. He buckled. He knew exactly what he needed to do. Zelensky is not going to be overthrown because Zelensky serves his masters extremely well, effectively, and doesn't do anything to upset the people who call the tune. So all of the talk about, oh, this is going to be with like Ngo Diem in South Vietnam, it misses the mark. The reason why Diem was overthrown was that he wasn't doing what the Americans wanted him to do. Diem was going his own way. I mean, there was stories that Diem was seeking reconciliation with Ho Chi Minh in North Vietnam. The Americans were very unhappy about that. But Diem also went against the Buddhists. He cracked down on the Buddhists. The Buddhists were always funded by the CIA. And the moment when you do that, then of course the Americans got very upset. There's a long tradition of the Buddhists being funded by the CIA. There was a case obviously in Tibet, in China, in Burma. You don't mess with the Buddhists, and so the Americans wanted Diem out. That doesn't apply with Zelensky. Zelensky does everything that the West wants from him, so there's no reason to get him out. If you get somebody else in there, you have no guarantee that he's not going to go his own way. And just in case, and that's the whole point of Nabu, just in case Zelensky has his own ideas, they make clear to him, hey, we are the masters here, and you don't mess with these Sorosites. Anyway, thank you so much, Robert. And then Robert goes on, asks, could the claim about Italians paying to shoot people in Sarajevo simply be someone borrowing heavily from the most dangerous game, i.e. a recycled fantasy about wealthy outsiders treating war as a human hunting safari? Well, I think that's a very... I think it's very true. I think that's a lot of these things are, particularly the wars in Yugoslavia, they lent themselves to these fantasies. So this most dangerous game, there was a movie. I saw it. I forgot the name of this movie. It was made in the 1930s, precisely this safari hunting people. And so, yeah, I'm sure this inspired this story. But the same thing really applied through Yugoslavia when, there were the most ludicrous stories that were being put out, and which were obviously fantasies. There was the sexual sadistic fantasies that people have, and so they regale unsuspecting readers with their own lurid fantasies. Oh, slicing heads off, gouging people's eyes out, people playing football with sliced off heads, and then of course you had the rape camps where in the rape camp they claimed about the rape camps in Bosnia and Herzegovina, and then they revived the idea of the rape camps in Kosovo. The whole notion of the rape camps, was kind of rather ridiculous, and so you had a lot of these feminist scholars started presenting these lurid fantasies as to what the Serbs were doing. Oh, the Serbs were practicing mass rape as a way of genocide. So they wanted to commit this genocide against the Bosnian Muslims by raping them. Now, this story, and there was a woman who I think wrote a whole book about this, this genocide by rape. I've forgotten the name of this woman. There's a worthless, because there was never any evidence of mass rape. But the interesting thing about this thesis of genocide by rape, that it makes very little sense. If you rape a Muslim woman, keep in mind, the Serbs and the Muslims were the same people. I mean, the only difference between them wasn't ethnic. I mean, it was just one group converted to Islam under Turkish rule, and another one didn't. But ethnically, they are the same people. It's just that they have a different religious affiliation. So if you rape a Muslim woman, well, what happens then? Well, you impregnate her. Okay, you impregnate her. Then she gives birth. Then what? Well, the Muslim woman will presumably look after the child. So you're actually adding to the population of the Muslims. It doesn't make a great deal of sense. I mean, that's the thesis of the rape doesn't really, the idea that this is some carefully thought out scheme was always laughable. So when you say that, they got this idea from it, a lot of the coverage, from the media, but also a lot of academics kind of battened onto these wars based on no evidence whatsoever, was a playing out of all manner of psychosexual, sadistic fantasies. What you can't get in a BDSM session, you can get in a lurid writing in the Guardian, and then of course and then you write a whole book about it based on nothing. And it was nothing, because even the various bodies, I think I can't remember the name of the woman, Dame Warburton, who launched an investigation into these stories of mass rapes. She pretty much had to say it never happened. I can't. It was a Warburton, Dame Warburton. I've forgotten her name. It never happened. There were some rapes, but the idea of the mass rape, the idea that somehow this was a concerted policy handed on down from Karadzic and Mladic, you must go rape as many women as possible. That was all absolute baloney. And as is, of course, this story about, I got to go kill some children. It's nice, 30 years later, we're back with this, with the Bosnia nonsense. Um, anyway, thank you so much, Robert. Cynthia, always very good to see you, Cynthia. And Cynthia, is a film scholar, film expert, with her encyclopedic knowledge of the history of cinema, and is also always helpful to us in providing so much fascinating details and background information. about the films that we show here on the Gaggle, and she also provides very, very interesting aesthetic judgments and very interesting observations, in films. So the things that I would miss, or everybody would miss, Cynthia actually picks up on. So it's always so it helps so much to get a better grasp on the films when you think, well, I didn't, here's something that you should notice. Here's something that's noticed, and sort of, yeah, wow, there's a lot of things there that I didn't notice, and I thought I knew something about this film. So it's a real uh, treat and a pleasure to have Cynthia here and to help guide us through the cinema history and actually individual films. So thank you so much, Cynthia. And we showed Shadow of a Doubt on Monday night. Very, very good film. Which, and again, Cynthia spotted all sorts of really interesting tidbits about that film, and of course, watch the film. Very well worth watching, and read Cynthia's running commentary, which really adds greatly to the pleasure of watching a classic. Anyway, so thank you, Cynthia. Anyway, Cynthia says the problem for Trump is that after promising his base he would release the Epstein files that Pam Bondi was reviewing on her desk, he then turned around and say they don't exist and it's all Democrat hoax, which has soured him with a huge portion of his base. It means that the Epstein files have become the dead albatross around his neck, which he can never remove, and it will continue to haunt him over the next 3 years and will keep popping up until he finally comes clean. I partly agree with that, but I mean, he obviously hasn't handled it very well. However, I would say though that he didn't actually promise that he would release the Epstein files. He was asked repeatedly during the campaign about the Epstein files, and he would say, well, I'll definitely look at it. And he would say something like, I don't see why not. He never actually said, I'm going to do it. And I think either with Joe Rogan or with Lex Friedman, he said something like, well, yeah, in principle, we could release them as long as they don't hurt people. Um, and I thought that was reasonable because you have to be very careful when you release a lot of documents because, you know, there's a lot of accusations that are being thrown around, and which means that, a lot of people's reputations are unfairly damaged. I mean, as I said, Andrew, his reputation is gone. He's a man. He's in his 60s. He'll never be able to recover the reputation that he had. I mean, this is a man who served his country in his uniform. I mean, he was, he served in the Falklands. He was. I mean, nobody particularly liked him, but he lived the life of a royal. Had parties and drank a lot and hung out with his friends, but he also had certain responsibilities, and he, as I say, he served, as a naval pilot. So, but all that has now been destroyed. And all people know now is the allegations of this fabulous somebody who just makes stuff up, Virginia Giuffre. So which he denies, but nobody believes his denials, and I think that's really unfair. So it's reasonable to say, well, we've got to be careful when we release stuff because we can't just have people just getting smeared and so on. Now, I think at this stage probably there's no alternative to releasing the material. You have to release them, but it but it's kind of ridiculous where apparently there's no obligation to save the reputations of people who haven't done anything wrong, but we blank out the names of the accusers. Why, I mean, you're either going to come clean, in which case the accusers should be identified, and then the accused should also be identified, or we're not. But we can't have, we'll smear a lot of people, and but the accuser enjoys the privilege of anonymity. I mean, that obviously is unfair. Um, but the thing here is that Epstein, you know, cultivated lots and lots of rich and important people. He devoted his life to worming his way in with rich, important, powerful people. Now, why he did it, I mean, that's a very interesting question, but that's what he did. Um, and now, all these rich, powerful, important people that he was friends with, they had nothing to do with his own sexual proclivities. But these two things are always confounded, and so somehow, well, if you went to his house and enjoyed his hospitality, therefore you were also part of this, his own child trafficking events. There's no evidence for any of that. So, in fact, Noam Chomsky had I wouldn't say friendly relations, but obviously, they did meet. He did correspond with with Epstein. And I think Chomsky was asked, well, why did you do that after he'd been convicted? And he said, well, I was under the impression that, under our legal and judicial system, once you've been convicted and punished, then in a way, you go back to normal life. You don't just essentially go on being punished forever and ever. There's a crime, there's a trial, there's a conviction, and then there's the punishment, and then afterwards, you ideally rehabilitated, but you get back to normal life. Somehow you don't just continue to get punished by being ostracized by everyone. But so that's why it was reasonable for Trump to hedge his bets and say, well, I'm willing to look at it, which is what he said. He didn't say, oh, I'm going to release all the Epstein files. Pam Bondi is a little different, because Pam Bondi actually said, oh, yeah, I'm going to do all of that. And she did say, oh, I have the Epstein client list on my desk, and I'm going to release that. And nobody even knew exactly what the hell is the Epstein client list. So she did make a lot of bold assertions, as did Kash Patel. And so now they are indeed in some trouble. I think they will be released. I actually think that Trump has realized that this is damaging him. This is just hurting him. He's losing numbers, and it looks. I mean, I agree with you. It looks like he's covering something up, even though no, I don't think there's really that much there. There's not, when they release these files, there's not going to be evidence of a child sex trafficking ring. I think what we'll know is what we already know. Yeah, Epstein had a certain proclivity for young women. He had this thing, those massages. He was constantly getting massages. I don't know why, but this was an obsession of his, was getting massages. But there's not going to be evidence that, Mohammed bin Salman and the rest, they're all part of this child sex trafficking. I don't think. But of course, even if you release everything, and they're not going to release everything because there's going to be privacy concerns and national security. I don't know. You're just going to get the same thing. As soon as you release everything, you're going to have all of the familiar crowd, both mainstream media and alt media, who I think who are kind of united on this issue, will say, "Oh, you haven't released everything. You haven't. There's still some material that has not been released." The cover-up continues. I mean, it's the same with the Kennedy assassination. I mean, it doesn't matter how many documents you get released, people will still say, "Oh no, no, you haven't really released the important document, the smoking gun, the order from the CIA to assassinate Kennedy." So I think they will be released, and I don't think anyone's going to be satisfied. And I think they're not satisfied because you're not gonna get the what people would love to see, the gigantic conspiracy involving all the important, rich, powerful people in the world, all gathering together at some island, enjoying festivities, and I guess chasing after, um, you know, 13-year-old young girls. I think anything short of that, which is kind of what everyone wants to see, anything short of that will say, oh, there has to have been a cover up. So anyway, Cynthia then goes on. How can Trump boast about how he saved or even made money for the US by selling weapons to NATO, who in turn gives the weapons free of charge to Ukraine, when there's nothing at all to boast about here? Nope. After all, a substantial share of NATO's budget still comes from the US, which means the US is still paying a good bit of these weapons. Oh, I absolutely agree with you. It's all of this is nonsense. It's just an accounting trick. First of all, it's not as if that they actually are going to come up with some money. Oh, here's the check, for this weapon system. It's the United States is going to, loan the money to the Europeans, and then the Europeans give the money to Ukraine, as you say, free of charge. So by an accounting trick, they'll say, oh well, Americans didn't really um, pay for this. The Europeans paid for it, but of course, Europeans didn't pay for it. They got a loan, and then you give it to Ukraine, but somebody is going to have to pay for this. I mean, ultimately, I mean, the money has to come from somewhere, and that's why this, Ursula von der Leyen and the rest of them, they keep eyeing this pot of money in Belgium, which is the Russia's frozen sovereign assets. You say, well, whatever, 140 billion euros. Nobody knows, but they want to say because somebody has to pay for this. I mean, because everyone is out of pocket. So the Americans aren't paying for it. The Europeans aren't paying for it. Ukrainians aren't paying for it. They say, well, we'll get Russia to pay for it. That's why there's the constant pressure for, to get this money from somewhere. So okay, well, this 140 billion euros, well, that'll tie us over for maybe 3 years. For 3 years, we'll keep Ukraine going, and then we'll think of something after 3 years. Um, but the principle, of course, is that Trump is, of course, I mean, whether through these loans to the Europeans in order for them to purchase from um, American weapons manufacturers, he's keeping the war going, and so therefore it's he's not fulfilling his campaign promises, which was he was going to end this war. Now, Trump has embraced the Biden NATO agenda. I mean, that basically it's the same thing. Well, let's keep the war going. Why? Because I don't think Trump has even seen through it. I mean, Trump, after all, claims and has always claimed that he can get on with Russia, and he thinks it's not a bad idea to have good relations with Russia. Biden never really wanted to get on with Russia. Biden and NATO, they have a very different idea of Russia, and so it makes sense for them to keep the war going. Okay, the longer we keep it going, the more we weaken Russia. That's their view. That isn't really Trump's view, but essentially Trump is pursuing that policy. So that's why he's essentially This Trump policy makes no sense at all on any level, other than, as I think Cynthia points out, well, he claims that he's making money, but of course he's not making any money. I mean, that's a joke. But it's like, oh, we're making money. Well, you're not making money, and even if you were making money, how does that help the United States? How does it in any way enhance America's national security, America's economic strength? So, but he's now embarked on this, and I think it's going to be very hard for him to get on. Anyway, Cynthia then goes on, and weapons costs are a drop in the bucket compared to all the other costs incurred by Ukraine. Absolutely, not just Zelensky's salary. That's a big salary, but the salaries of everyone else in the Kiev regime, military or civilian, including the U.S. contractors, of course. So, what's going to pay for all that? Europe won't account for the bill, so that leaves the U.S. to do so. But Trump still boastfully claims that the U.S. has cut off all funding for Ukraine. So how can he continue to boast about that without coming across as a bold-faced liar? Yeah, I agree. I agree with you. I think that's um, that yes. I mean, the Ukraine is getting money. Trump's claims otherwise. Ukraine is getting money from the United States. Absolutely, at every level. Trump can just make stuff up. By doing these kinds of accounting tricks. You can always do an accounting trick. Oh well, we're not really paying for it. I mean, this is money coming from somewhere else. No, of course, America's paying for it, and America's going to continue paying for it, and just as long as Ukraine can keep going. But I think Ukraine can keep going for some time. Um, how long? I don't know. But Ukraine, I think, can keep going probably for another 2-3 years. And so, yeah, I mean, it's of course, Americans pay for it. It's nothing to do with MAGA. It's nothing to do with America First. And it's the peculiarity because I mean, Trump's idea of getting involved in Nigeria is ridiculous. Trump's war against Venezuela is ridiculous. Trump's attack on Iran was ridiculous. But at least you can ascribe those to Trump. I mean, this was somehow, that Trump kind of invented the whole Nigeria thing out of whole cloth. Trump invented the whole Maduro. The Maduro is some huge threat to the United States out of whole cloth. And then Iran, because of whatever, Trump's has had an obsession with Iran for some time, going all the way back to 2015. But this policy, the Ukraine policy, that wasn't even his. That was Biden's policy, and yet he has embraced it. No matter how many times he says, "Oh, it's not my war, it's Biden's war," it doesn't matter. It's your war, and it's your war because you had a chance to end it, and you didn't take that chance. We've talked about this before. He had a chance to end it in Alaska, and he didn't do it. So once he didn't do that, then it became his war. I agree with you, Cynthia. So Robert says, odd that Chomsky of all people has become ChatGPT's most hostile critic. Is he? I didn't know that. Dismissing it outright instead of grappling with what it's actually doing. It's a surprisingly rigid posture from someone who built his fame on challenging old assumptions. It is a rigid posture because, I mean, ChatGPT gets things wrong. I mean, there's no question it does get things wrong. But you have to then challenge Chat GPT. So when I mean, when I work with it and he says something, look, this is wrong, and you go back to it and say, no, this is completely wrong what you just said. And then he comes up, oh yeah, you're absolutely right. We got it wrong. Now, it's a way. You have to learn how to handle it. You shouldn't just accept unquestioningly what it says because it just makes a lot of mistakes. But the thing, your point about Chomsky challenging old assumptions, and he did do that. He has done that. but he's also embraced, a lot of conventional wisdom. Strangely enough, he embraced conventional wisdom on COVID. It was very odd for him not to be dubious about the whole COVID hysteria. And of course, he embraced the conventional wisdom on the climate. But repeats all the familiar bromides about the huge crisis for humanity because of climate change and so on. It just seems surprising somebody who does approach things critically that he does accept conventional wisdom too many times. I think it's just very surprising. Even on Yugoslavia, and he was actually quite good, or better than most, but even he kind of accepted a lot of conventional wisdom about Yugoslavia. I mean, we should, Edward Herman, his erstwhile colleague, now the late Edward Herman, he never accepted the nonsense about Yugoslavia, but Chomsky did. So he has a number of blind spots, and so yeah, challenges conventional wisdom often, but he also accepts it. Too often for comfort. But I don't know what I'd like to know what it is that he said about Chat GPT. Why is he hostile to it? Anyway, I think my time is up. So thank you very much, everybody who joined me. Thank you very much for all these very interesting, stimulating, and informative questions and comments. I wasn't expecting to see the face of Roy Cohn this evening. It's a kind of a voice and a face from the past. So, well, that was a pleasure. Thank you, everybody, for your comments, contributions, your questions. And thank you above all to those who put something into the tip jar to try to keep the dogs happy. Very hard to do. They're going to be up quite soon. They like to get up early. The first thing, check the tip jar. And then the next thing is what a bloody, he doesn't do anything. I mean, we put all this, make all this effort and he doesn't do anything. It's a useless, complete waste of space, and then I have to deal with them. So that's their attitude towards me. So, but what can I do? So thank you, everybody, for today. We're going to do some podcasts over the weekend. And then on Monday, we do the live stream jointly with Peter. And then next Tuesday, I'm back with my solo. Hope to see you all then. Don't forget, movie night on Monday. And so see you, and then see you very, very soon. All the best. Good night. Bye bye.